Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's first part of the BigQuery Survival Guide mini series. For those who are just joining us, all of these sessions are going to be recorded. They're going to be emailed to you and you will have access to all of the content that we have. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function, not the chat function. Sathya and I are very excited to hear your feedback, hear from you, but also any question that you have. If we don't get to those questions immediately during the session, we will make sure to directly email you and make sure that you get an answer. Now, before we get started, a little bit about your speakers today. My name is Andy Fernandez, Senior Director of Product Marketing here at HYCU. For those who maybe are hearing about HYCU for the first time, we were the Google Cloud Partner of the Year for 2024, and we're the fastest data protection company in the world. We have a very unique focus that I'm excited about within the Google estate, especially in today's conversation around data warehouses as well. But I have the privilege of being joined by Sathya Sankaran. Sathya, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Andy, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I run cloud products within HYCU. So our business with all three hyperscalers that I run. And today, really excited to be talking about how awesome BigQuery is and why your crown jewels are landing there at a disproportionately high pace, and why that makes it even more important that we protect it. And again, thank you, Andy, for hosting it. Thank you. Andy is our globetrotting Mr. HYCU, recently minted Employee of the Year. And thanks, Andy, for hosting this webinar series.
Absolutely. And Sathya, I think you're going to be at Google next, right?
Yes. And if any of you listeners are going to be there, come say hi. We're going to be the only booth with a picture of a lake over there. So come say hi, and I'll be there all 3 days and look forward to meeting a lot of you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sathya. Now, let's get right to it. This is a three-part mini-series for the rest of the week where we're going to focus on 5 clear things to discuss. Whether you are a data engineer or even on the data science team, and maybe you have some brand new responsibilities around data protection that you have to think about, or you're being supported by the IT and cloud architecture team. There's 5 things that you're going to walk away from this entire series. 1, you're going to have a very clear understanding of your data responsibility. From there, you're going to be able to identify specific scenarios where there could be data set loss as well, whether that is from human error or a misconfiguration. We're going to get into the details of that. We're also going to get into the details of what's the difference between recreating a data set, and most importantly, what is the cost of that versus a recovery operation. We're also going to do a full breakdown on the best practices, which Google does a great job of providing native recovery tooling. We're going to break down what that tooling looks like, how to use it, what are the best practices associated, and we're also going to provide you with the checklist for data protection around how to complement your native tooling and think through any types of third-party backups that you might require for your organization. And at the end of it, we're going to show you what HYCU is all about, and you're going to see a live demo of our data protection experience for Google BigQuery. Everyone on this call will have access to a free trial as well. So let's get started. Now, a few of the things that we want to address here is just to make sure that there's clarity and understanding the role, a breakdown of the responsibility. Sathya and I, in conversations with customers and folks and partners all over the world, this is not simply a conversation we have within Google. It's a conversation we have with every single cloud platform and ISV in the world. And customers, they might think, well, protecting BigQuery, I'm subscribed to Google. I'm paying Google for their infrastructure, and I think it's Google's responsibility, not mine, to protect BigQuery. Now, before Sathya jumps in, I kind of want to provide this dumb analogy that I like to use that clearly explains what the relationship between you, the tenant, the customer of a cloud provider looks like. This concept, by the way, applies to any hyperscaler and any other SaaS platform or even data warehouse that you're using in your organization. But to understand the shared responsibility model, let's think about it as a parking garage. When you look at a parking garage, what are your expectations of going there? Maybe Sathya and his family are going to dinner on Friday. I believe in New Jersey, they might want to, park their car before they're getting to the restaurant. What do they expect from that? Well, they're going to drive into the garage. They expect that the lights are on, that it's safe, that it's accessible, that they can pay, that they can park their car, and when they come back, that the car's still there and they can go back home. It's the same experience with your Google project, with your Google tenant. Think of BigQuery as that car and any other service that you're using within Google as well. If somebody scratches Satya's car or he leaves his window open and his laptop is stolen, who takes responsibility for that? Is the garage going to write Satya a check and say, "Hey, sorry that your laptop or that somebody hit your car. Here's a couple $1,000 for your troubles"? No. Why? Because it's impossible for the garage to do that across every car. It's not their responsibility. Google and every other hyperscaler and every other cloud platform does the same, where they say, look, you no longer have to manage the infrastructure of a data warehouse. We're going to give you the best infrastructure in the world. We're going to make sure it's available. We're going to make sure everything's working. But you also have to take some responsibility for your data, whether it's following bad security practices, leaving the window open, or somebody hitting your car. Maybe there's some incident in your organization. It's impossible for Google to understand what a good deletion operation is versus a bad one, which is why you have a shared responsibility model. But Satya, from your perspective, this is not a new conversation that we have. We have this conversation around all cloud workloads. Why do you think this happens? Like, what is the misunderstanding? Because Google does an incredible job around high availability. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, a couple of things, right? So first, I think we've had this conversation. I mean, in my case, at least going back 12 years, 2013, I think we moved our organization to M365. And I remember having this conversation back then when we were made that move, who's going to do the backup? And to our surprise, back then, we found that nobody was doing backups and someone had to, right? And that created that whole industry of SaaS backups, back in the day, which we're excelling at this point. But we talked a lot about responsibility, but let's take what happens after responsibility, right? Irrespective of what happened, if something does happen, what is your recourse? Often, when you are in a car, in a garage, and something happens to your car or belongings in the car, you generally go back and rely on your insurance, right? And that's what you could do. Does it mean you avoid garages? I live in New York, New Jersey, and you ask me what is my expectation. My minimum expectation, I actually find a parking spot when I enter. My minimum expectation is the board outside that says there are 8 parking spots open. I actually find them when I walk, when I drive in, and it's not missing sensors, right? So you can't avoid garages in some cases. And it's the same reason why you can't have infrastructure that scales like BigQuery does. You can't have infrastructure that performs like BigQuery does. So you do need to use other services. So you just have to make sure when shit happens, you have insurance, right? And everybody that drives a car knows that, carries an insurance. And it's the same thing that we have to do when it comes to your data sets. Something can happen. It need not be a bad decision on your side. It need not be, poor security practices, but things can still happen. And you just need to make sure you carry that insurance. And insurance in the context of data is backups.
Thank you, Seth. Yeah, that's an excellent breakdown. Now, one of the things that immediately happens after that is folks then say, well, this is a data aggregator. It's an ecosystem. I don't really see a way for us to lose our data in BigQuery. Satya, let's talk through some of these common threats. I'm actually going to go in and animate all of these, and let's talk through specific anecdotes and scenarios where I can explicitly lose my data because of an action that I did within BigQuery.
Yeah, anybody says I can't lose access to data, I invite you to give me access to your BigQuery environment, and I can quickly demonstrate how that is false. And again, it is absolutely possible to lose your data sets in BigQuery. Yes, it is true that for a long time, data warehouses were your second copy of data. Your first copy of data often sat somewhere else, either your databases, your unstructured data. You've got lots of workloads where you're storing your first form of data, and the only role of BigQuery was aggregation, right? But we know there is an evolution of lakehouse architecture. You're optimizing, BigQuery not just for analytics but also for storage, which means there is now a lot of workloads land straight in BigQuery, and it's the only place where you have some copy of your data. And so you need to protect it. what can happen. Look, things can go wrong in terms of how you load data, how you read data, how you process data, and how you store data. And even after storing, things can go wrong when someone comes in. Just the other day in Reddit, I was reading a post where someone said, hey, I had the prod window open and I had the test window open and I was trying to delete something in test and I happened to delete everything in prod, right? It's really just a simple problem of I had the wrong alt tab when I ran the command, right? They look the exact same. You run certain things and it happens that you lose your data sets in your prod environment. What I really want to highlight also is that when you have the nuclear bomb problems, right? If shit's really on fire, um, it is actually somewhat easy in BigQuery to go back to a point in time where you can resolve because people notice when things are on fire. People notice when there is a bomb that goes off. But what you don't notice in environments like BigQuery is there is a lot of partitioning going on. There is a lot of distribution. You have 200 data sets, 7,000 tables. These are all things that are very, very normal in a BigQuery environment. So when you start losing data in places you don't notice, 7 days is not a lot of time to go back and solve those problems for you, right? There are going to be data sets that are accessed only once a month or once a quarter when you run reports and trending and so on. And those data sets also need to be protected. And where we have where these insurance policies of backups really come into play.
Perfect. Thank you, Satya. And we have a full breakdown of this that we'll follow up as well, because what we're going to do in the next session is actually show and isolate all of these different scenarios and talk about where native tooling is perfect for a recovery, and then where do you want to think about a third-party backup to complement that native tooling as well. And to Satya's mention, scrolling through Reddit, I think Reddit is a place of constellation for anyone who's deleted anything. It used to be Stack Overflow. It seems like it's Reddit now, but data loss is not theoretical. These are scenarios that happen every single day. This is something that as long as humans are touching software, regardless of what that software is, there will be a mistake. And that's not even accounting for insider threats or things that are outside of your organization's control as well. But then in the next step, right, you said, well, I understand that there's a scope of responsibility for me. I understand that there are possible scenarios where data and data sets could be lost or misconfigured. Now, Satya, I should just be able to recreate the data set. I have the original source data. What is the problem? Walk us through a little bit, Satya, between why it might not be wise and what are the challenges with simply having to recreate the data set every time there's a data loss scenario.
Yeah, the answer to most of this is try it, um, right? Lose your data set and start from scratch how you're going to create this environment, right? There's a lot of path dependency to the data set that you see in BigQuery, right? It starts with data sources, it starts with ingestion and transformation, right? And you do have to read this data, and streaming reads, costs a lot of money. So it's not just about the effort of what you need to do, but also how much money and cost that is going to be. And we talk about sources, right? With sources, you've got streaming APIs. You just heard Twitter raise up their API expenses, significantly, at least twice in the last year, right? And suddenly you're paying $500,000 to read through some of these tweets, which may be part of your sentiment analysis workflow that is going on in BigQuery. And the same thing, Salesforce, I think, is the most popular connector for data warehouses today in the market. And if you really want to get a lot of API calls, you need to upgrade editions, and Salesforce upgrading editions need not be cheap, as you all know, right? And there is data integration cost. You're using other tools to bring data in. You've got a Fivetran or a Rudderstack or any number of connectors that are out there where you're paying for every row that is processed in BigQuery, and that also takes time and money, right? So there is just so many things that you have to do in order to get your pipe cost, your egress cost, because you need to co-locate the data, where BigQuery is in order to be able to perform at a speed. There's rate limit increases, and finally, my favorite icon of the day, and you do all of this, why? The amount of time you lose and the amount of money you lose just because you didn't have the right insurance in place is extraordinary. You don't want all of your time and energy going down the drain when this is a workload that is tied to revenue stream. This is not a cost. This is not a cost area in a company. This actually drives a lot of your businesses. So why not have that insurance in place, and why go through this loss of team productivity and opportunity costs?
No, thank you, Satya. We're going to do even further breakdown of this in future sessions. But here comes the last myth that we have to kind of answer sometimes, and it's important to summarize things. Though responsibility, it is both Google's and yours. Google does an incredible job. It's on us to, as customers, to also do a good job protecting their data. Data can be lost, we know. Recreation is not as straightforward nor as cost effective as you may think. So you have to think about other ways in order to recover that data. The last one actually goes beyond BigQuery. And it's, look, I'll look into BigQuery third-party backup, but I don't have to worry about my data connectors, right? That's a completely different estate. It's something to think about. And before we do that, Satya, walk me through this ecosystem and walk me through what it actually means to be an ecosystem versus, hey, I have BigQuery, the warehouse, the product. What does this actually look like in what we call a lakehouse architecture?
Yeah, look, I think it's what you're seeing is the evolution of BigQuery into a multimodal unified platform, and why there is so much data being thrown. I mean, it's growing at a disproportional pace compared to the rest of your data sets, primarily because there is one driver in practically every organization today, which is forcing people to put everything in one place. Right? That's your AI infrastructure. Everybody wants to be leveraging the most out of AI. And to that, you need to bring AI close to where your data is. And you need to organize your data in a form where AI can consume that data set, right? And as you know, I mean, we've done this as a resilience survey where we found an average organization has over 200 SaaS services that are out there. That's how disaggregated your data set is today, right? And BigQuery needs to be thought of as an ecosystem and not as a workload. This is not a one random database that we support. We support 80 plus workloads, but BigQuery is, you think of it as the mothership where, a lot of data sets that you have disaggregated in many different places, you do ingest them into a single source of truth on which you run your AI workflow. So your Vertex pipeline runs on top of data sets that are sitting on BigQuery. That's again why you're seeing this kind of disproportional growth in BigQuery, and these connectors all play a role. And again, as we talked about, to take data from the source and to get it to BigQuery, there is a lot that happens between point A and point B. And there's a lot of effort and cost and resources spent in going from point A, how it exists in source, and how it exists by the time you actually analyze the data set. So you do need to protect both sides of the thing. And when you can have a solution that can cover a broad set of this ecosystem, that's certainly something to gravitate towards, because who's got time to manage 20 point solutions for all of these different connectors, right? So that's one of the things to really think through when you're building a backup solution. Hey, yes, it supports BigQuery, but does it also support, my 80 plus connectors that are in GA today? How many of them am I using, and can I protect a good majority of them?
Satya, let's actually double click on that, on the source itself, particularly sources with extremely high change rates. Let's call it GitHub, Salesforce, even certain identity access management solutions that even feed into BigQuery. What happens? What is the actual business impact of data loss at the source level? And what does that translate to into risk from a BigQuery perspective?
Yeah, look, every company will tell you that employees are their most expensive resources, right? And the most critical thing that you protect is data. These SaaS services bring those two together: the system of engagement and the system of record, right? And if you lose these services, if you lose access to these services, your people are not being productive, which is your most expensive line item in most businesses. And if you lose data, all that work they had done up until that point goes goes completely wasted. So both your system of record and system of engagement needs to be protected. And one of the things that we overlook today with a lot of these SaaS services, again, as I mentioned, M365 came up, I think it was released in 2011, right? So it's been 14 years. And you would be surprised to find out less than 1/3 of M365 subscriptions are backed up today, right? 400 million subscriptions, a huge sample set. It's not that sampling size is a problem. So 400 million subscriptions, paying subscriptions to M365, but less than 1/3 actually get protected. So you see that penetration a lot lower in some of these other workloads where you have high value data sets. And when your system of record and system of engagement gets broken, you can't operate your business. And the problem today in the world is if you do lose it, I think what we ran a survey and something like 90% of the organizations didn't think they could bring back their SaaS infrastructure if it failed within an hour or even within a day. So 24-hour RTO wasn't sufficient to be able to bring back SaaS. I can tell you why it's not sufficient. Probably because you're not backing up, right? And you're not backing up with the right solution to be able to bring it back as well. So that's something that really needs to be dug deep into and make sure that you're protecting your systems very well.
No, thank you, Satya. One thing to mention too, fundamentally, what we just discussed from both the responsibility, from a liability, from a management perspective within BigQuery applies to all of these source connectors as well. All of these integrations also follow the same rules. Whether it's Salesforce, whether it's GitHub, whether it's Box, you can go and look at the same shared responsibility model. It would be maybe a different diagram with their logos and their palettes, but it's the same legal model. We will manage the infrastructure. We will make sure that it is available and safe at the infrastructure level, but you have to take some responsibility into account at the tenant level. If you make a mistake, if somebody leaves password without MFA, that is not on Google. It is not on Salesforce. It is on the customer. So there's a series of best practices that we need to follow here. Now, before we get into the specific short checklist that we've created for you, one thing that I wanted to double click on, Satya, especially because it's a question from the audience, there is obviously a lot of noise with AI, a lot of noise, a lot of architecture. But let's talk about the role of BigQuery. In AI, people often conflate things like vector databases with what the role that BigQuery has. But walk me through the role of BigQuery within today's actual ML/AI architecture, and then what is the value of BigQuery in that?
Look, what is BigQuery really, really good at? Right? It delivers a very, very cheap storage for lots of your data set. A lot of your AI requires data sets to be put in one place, and BigQuery delivers on that. BigQuery is really, really good at calculating values out of that data set. So if you want to drive some inference, you want to train your data sets, you've got the right infrastructure in place. And look, we see this in so many things. I've always said as a technologist, you can recognize good technology when you see one. There aren't a whole lot around. I mean, we all create technology, but everybody is in a level of maturity, right? But BigQuery is one of those things that puts a smile on your face every time I work on it. And I say this every time I meet a Googler. You've got plenty to be proud of with what you built with a BigQuery. The little things that it can deliver in terms of speeds and feeds is phenomenal. So when you have an AI infrastructure, potentially on GPUs that are super expensive today, and you've got a share of your GPUs, you don't want your data to be the bottleneck. You don't want your data architecture to be the bottleneck. And BigQuery delivers in speeds and feeds that I've not seen a lot of other technology that can. We see customers backing up, over 5 terabytes a minute in BigQuery, and that's probably 4 hours or 5 hours of backup, at least with a lot of other technologies to back up a similar time. So what takes 4 or 5 hours for some technologies takes BigQuery a minute or two to back up. And that's why I think it becomes really important from an AI world. And what people also don't recognize is AI infrastructure is not one of those one and done scenario. You do constantly fine tune your data set. You do experiment. It's not something, even the best LM models take 100 days to train, right? So it is a series of experiments, a series of measurement to make sure that these models are meeting my benchmarks and explainability and all of that, right? So you've got your KPIs to hit and benchmarks to hit. So it's an ongoing activity. AI is not one and done. You need to maintain this infrastructure. There is a lot of work that happens in a time-bound manner and in a series of fashion. And so you need to make sure that you're protecting various checkpoints you do with these experiments. One of those experiments could be a bad experiment. You need to go back to an earlier checkpoint. That's where backup and data protection comes into play as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Satya. Now, for the last minute of today's presentation, we're gonna dive into this much more in the second session. So if you've already registered, you'll have access to the second session where we're actually going to get into the weeds of what should you be doing, how to make use of native tooling, when are certain use cases to think about complementing those native toolings with a third-party backup like HYCU. And we're going to walk through that in a very, very specific way. But Satya, for those who might only be joining for today's session, it's good to get some value out of three core areas to follow through from a checklist perspective. And what are the things that every IT person who's suddenly been foisted upon the protection of BigQuery, or maybe a data engineer has to take responsibility into their own hands? Walk through first, very quick rapid fire. What are the backup requirements first that you must have when it comes to BigQuery and the connectors?
Yeah, look, I think the most important things to think through are the very basics, right? One, are you meeting your compliance needs? I know compliance and regulations are not the flavor of our time these days, but it really does exist to save the good version of you from the bad version of you or the lazy version of you, right? So these compliance requirements exist because we want to make sure that you've got something protected, and this gives you a structure to make sure that that's protected. And a lot of regulations today are moving from should language to shall language. And what that means is when it's should, it's advice. When the regulation starts saying shall, it means you better do it. Otherwise, your board members are not actually, meeting their obligations and running the company. So a lot of language is moving to shall. For example, NYDFS moved to shall language for backups and compliance. And that means you better do it because this is where, again, you're storing a lot of customer data, you're storing a lot of IP data, and all of that needs to be protected. So start with compliance. Second, make sure the backups you're taking are consistent, right? And this, one of the few things that we learned from some of our customers, when we added BigQuery support, we had a lot customer come in and say, hey, I've got all these dependent views and routines and function calls that kind of tap into other data sets. And when I back up, they're all coming from different time slots and they're not really consistent. How do I do this? So we created these atomic backup capability where you can kind of go to a single point in time and take backups. We'll cover this in future sessions, but make sure your data is consistent. So are you compliant? Are you consistent? Is your backup tamper-proof? Do you've got immutability set into it? Is your backup comprehensive? Is it backing up everything or just the base table data? And are you meeting your recovery point objectives? If something fails, you've got to bring it back. If it's going to take you 3 months to bring it back, is it a good enough solution, right? But you need to ensure that what you're creating actually meets your objectives. And as I said, do you have one solution to back up, all of your applications in your ecosystem?
Perfect. Now that's just the backup side. Let's talk a little bit about the management side, Satya.
Yeah, look, management side, you got to have one solution that manages a large number of your footprint. I mean, this is straightforward. Nobody has one application that they manage at BigQuery scale, right? If you are even a mid-tier or BigQuery customer, you're never actually just dealing with one application. You're dealing with many applications that lead into storing that data in BigQuery. So being able to deliver global management, policy assignment, auditing, alerting, all into a consistent workflow. You can use your SRE teams for a bunch of these things, but can the solution send data to these SRE teams, does it give you the tools to monitor and manage everything in one place? That's a key requirement for us to think through. And do you want to maintain that? If you've got all these SaaS services for your production data, why maintain your own infrastructure for backups for your secondary data? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So can a solution deliver the ease of use of SaaS while still giving you full ownership and control of your data set? So something to think through.
No, that's incredible, Satya, and that's all fine and dandy. But at the end of the day, the most important piece is when the time comes that there's a data loss scenario, can you actually recover? What are some of the validation and recovery requirements that you suggest that you should have in place?
Yeah. Look, today, what is your recovery scenario? First place, right? So you lost some data sets, you didn't notice it for a period of time. Well, you do need to bring it back. You're relying on some trending information, and turned out your old data sets were naturally expired, right? Because you can set, record expiration time frame. So you could set it to 30 days, and turns out you actually need it for 90 days, right? And so being able to, one, perform kind of granular recovery at like table level and so on, or even views or routines and all of these things. If you can deliver granular recovery, nothing like it. Second, what is your other failure scenario? Somebody got accessed into my project and deleted a whole bunch of things, or I got locked out of my own project, and now I need to go back to a different location, right? Or a different project. So you do need to do cross-platform or cross project recovery in this case, and can the solution depend on it? And you have so much work going on through pipelines today. Can this be automated? Can this be auditable within your pipeline infrastructure that you have? So it's not one person clicking on a bunch of buttons every time.
Perfect. Thank you, Satya. This is just a sample of what we're going to cover in the next session. We're really going to get into the weeds to understand what those requirements are, what you're going to be able to really fulfill. Google does an incredible job with their native tooling. They go above and beyond, offering you your own self-service recovery options. And we're going to cross and map out what you're able to do with the self-service tooling, and what are some of the capabilities you might want to complement that tooling with a third-party backup solution like HYCU. So that's the end of today's session of the mini series. Up next, in the next session, which later this week will be 20 minutes, we're going to talk about how and when to use the native tooling. What are some of the key use cases and scenarios where it would make sense to complement it with a third-party backup? And we're also going to provide a selection criteria for a secure and consistent third-party backup vendor out there that allows you to do so. For those who are interested in learning a little bit more before that webinar, the main call to action of today is continue with us on this series. You're going to get a lot of value. Within 3 sessions, you're going to walk away with an exact understanding of how and when to have an appropriate data protection plan for BigQuery and your connectors. And it'll give you a lot of value within your organization to help from risk. We've also identified a much deeper understanding of some of the myths that we've talked about today. There are many more myths that Sathya and I encounter when having conversations with Google users all over. So we kind of created this full breakdown of the top myths that we find and debunk them slowly. So scan this QR code. You'll also have access to it via email. It's a very, very good understanding. But the most important thing, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. We're particularly very passionate about this topic. This is something that unique where, especially in the enterprise, the data protection ecosystem is not really talking about this. But we know that these are the crown jewels and the most critical workloads in your organization. So we ask that you join us, whether live or on demand, for the next session on our tooling workshop as well. With that, I want to thank you all for your time, your attention. Thank you, Satya, and we'll see you in a couple of days.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.